Welcome again. On behalf of myself and Alex Katahakis, we created Center for Healthy Sex as a place for psychotherapy for men, women, and couples with a variety of sexual concerns, for sex therapy issues, couples work, sex and love addiction treatment work. We run groups, intensives, individual therapy. And we also are really big promoters of continuing education. So we have an annual training course every winter for sex therapy for 18 hours. And hello, welcome. And an annual sex addiction treatment training class every fall. So we announce all this via email, so you'll know about it if you're on our email list, and welcome you to participate. And we've been holding the monthly CU lectures like today's for the past 6 years, every Friday. It's one Friday a month, and they've been great. Big variety of speakers, including Patty Britton, who spoke for us in the past. Thank you.
Everybody needs a groupie.
That's right. Well, if you're interested in the field of sex therapy, you should know Patty and Robert, because they have been pioneers in this field for a long time and know everybody and have a million of great resources. So if you need a referral or anything like that. You're trying to avoid the cameras that way you're there? Okay, so just careful of the door, because
It might be better right in that corner.
yeah, the camera can't see you in that corner either.
Okay, well,
I don't want you to get.
Tom told me to sit here. So.
Oh.
Okay, well, okay, with that, I know that'll work, and that's why the door's a little more clear. So at any rate, if you have clients you want to send our way, or you just have inquiries or questions, we're happy to just answer your phone calls and consult with you. If you do send a client, we will have a release sign so we can speak with you and find how we can best serve them and collaborate with you in whatever capacity you prefer. And so we really appreciate your support of the work we do here. So I want to introduce to you today Alison Mezey, who is our presenter. And Alison facilitates the experiential portion of our intensive programs. So one of the flyers on your chair references sex and love addiction treatment intensives. And the Saturday portion of the schedule is the full 2-week schedule laid out. And on Saturdays is experiential in the afternoon, and that's Alison's portion. And you're going to get a live demo of what she does with our clients. So we run the intensives for a maximum of 4 men or women at a time who are struggling with sex and love addiction issues, as well as week-long intensive for partners of those individuals. And you've been anchoring that for some time, and we really appreciate it. And your clients give you very high marks on the evaluation, so I know it really matters to them. So a little bit about Alison. She's been a body therapist and somatic practitioner for the past 30 years, and she's certified in systemic constellation work as well as walking your shoes. And she approaches any issue from the client's felt experience, guiding them to access previously inaccessible understanding through the brilliance of the body. I love that sentence, so I said to read it verbatim to you. And Alison also specializes in clearing sexual, emotional, and physical pain due to trauma, family lineages, and cultural inhibition. She has extensive training in family constellation, having trained by the founder, Bert Hellinger. So her practice is based primarily here in LA for private work, as well as sessions that she regularly facilitates in Costa Rica and Paris, as well as phone consultations via Skype. So all her info is there. You can connect with her if you are interested in more about the work she does. Very powerful, I know that from personal experience and also that of our clients. So today's presentation is entitled Applying Family Constellation Work to the Treatment of Sex and Love Addiction. And when she's all finished, you'll know why I call her Mighty Mezey. So here we go. All right, so thank you.
Thank you. I love this place. I truly love it. I love the people who founded it and the people who come here, and I just always have such respect for everybody I work with. I see actually the people who come here as being these deeply courageous people who are going through the underworld, who are willing to look at it, not just for themselves and their families, but also for the whole planet, is how I hold them. So one of the beauties of constellation work is to look at what's going on in the whole family system, as well as what's going on in a person's soul. So I'm going to be talking about how that works and then showing you, and hopefully some of you will participate. But first I just wanted to thank you all for coming. It always just amazes and touches me that of all the people in this world of 7 billion people, we are the group who united here at this time to be together and hopefully share a really rich experience. So thank you so much for coming. And let's see, so does anybody other than a couple of you know about family constellation work, just so I have an idea of little, not really, little? Okay. So I am so thrilled. One of the many things I love about the Center for Healthy Sex is that they really are up for this groundbreaking work. This is a new field of bringing this work into clinical therapy work, and we're just finding that it interfaces beautifully with being able to get to some very deep and information very, very quickly that then the therapeutic team can take into their longer term practice and really work with the material that comes up very much from the body. So constellation work is a somatic language. It was developed by Bert Hellinger, who's a German. He's just turned 90 now. I'm just going to tell you a really brief bit about his background and how this came to be. He was drafted into the war at the very end of World War II, did not want to be there, did see combat, and this engendered, as it did in most of the world, the question of how is it that basically good people can do such horrible things. And what he came to understand is that conscience is relative, that it is basically a sensory or a perceptual organ that gives a sense of how we can continue to belong or not belong, and that as beings, as social beings, we have to belong at all costs, so that we will end up doing all kinds of amazing things, including very violent things, or including things in our own lives, struggling with difficulties in relationship, with money, with sex, with addiction, with our health, in order to belong to our family systems and our cultural systems. So constellation work is a really important look at it's a wider frame than a lot of therapeutic models. So we're not just looking at the person as an individual in relation to their family of origin challenges, but also what might a person be carrying for previous generations, for traumas that have happened and that have not been taken care of at the time they occurred. So war is certainly a huge one, particularly working in Europe, for example, though it touches many of us here as well, directly and indirectly. There are usually, in every human's lives, there are deaths that are occurring, sometimes prematurely and very shockingly, but deaths in our culture particularly tend to not be handled very well. They tend to be shoved away, denied, many cases where people are actually shunned for going through a full mourning process, and it leads to a lot of trouble, which you'll see some examples of today. But that's just one example. There can be, people can be forced into marriage, even in our own culture. It happens pretty regularly. I've been seeing that coming up lately. And there's some basic orders that Bert Hellinger came to see about human nature that really end up governing how well a system functions or doesn't. And I'm going to go through a few of those things. One of them is we need a sense of belonging, as I've already mentioned. And that if people are excluded in our families, which happens if you think of your own family right now, there's probably at least one person, whether it's, crazy Aunt Doris, who's just too eccentric for people to feel comfortable with, or somebody with an addiction, for example. Here comes someone. Or someone who has a sexuality that isn't acceptable, someone who has a religion, somebody who marries somebody from another culture. So there's all kinds of reasons why people can become excluded in a family. So constellation work, by the way, the name constellation work, I think of it, people always think it has to do with the stars or astrology or something like this. It has to do with the geometry of relationship. So what this shows, by externalizing someone's psyche and the psyche of a whole family, is we're able to externalize what's going on unconsciously and somatically. So, what was I just saying before about, we're talking about order and geometry and constellations. So this is just an amazing way to be able to really look at what is going on. For example, when someone's excluded, a whole system, if you were able to see the web of a system, goes off kilter from something like that. Or if a death happens and is buried away, it goes off kilter again. Or if there was a death of a child in a family, usually that leads to another distortion in the family, where then the next children, not only are they struggling with the loss of a sibling, but they can be struggling with the loss of a parent. And then parentification happens, and all kinds of things happen down the line. So again, we'll look at a couple of examples today, but one of the beauties of doing this work, again, in a therapeutic setting, is very quickly you can get a lot of information about how is somebody feeling in relationship to their parents, their siblings, and even at something like an addiction. So another principle, are there any questions so far? I'm probably talking kind of fast and putting out a lot of information. Does anybody have any questions so far? Is it clear what I'm saying?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Good. So another issue is balance of give and take. That's a second really important principle, is the balance of give and take. And that also gets really out of whack in families. Say again, a parent dies or is depressed from their own issue that wasn't resolved, or their parents having problems, speak out of poverty, for example, and they're not able to be there. Suddenly, an eldest child, for example, ends up having to take care of their siblings and even take care of their own parents. So not only is that an issue of the third principle, which is orders, there being a natural biological order, that when that gets thrown off also creates problems. So you can again see this. In this case, I'm going to use mats today to show what's going on. There's ways to also do constellation work with objects, and most commonly with people in a room, so that people are representing different aspects of a dynamic going on in a person's psyche and or family. So I think what I'm going to do, rather than talk more about how this works, is to just start to give some examples of some cases so that you can really get a sense of some things going on. I'm going to start with a couple configurations. First, I'm going to just let you know, when people come into the IOP, I check in with them about how their week is gone and what is really at the forefront of their concern or their curiosity or their distress, so that I can really clarify from the very beginning what is it that we're going to be looking at. Because a constellation is it's a snapshot of the present moment. That's part of why it's so potent, because it's really, again, externalizing what is true for the client right now. How are they viewing things? And they may, by the way, have been holding this internal and usually conflictual internal configuration within them for their whole lives. But it's still, in this present moment, what is showing up as being problematic in some way. So once it's really clear, well, what is the frame? What are we really looking at? I start to ask them to set up meaning, to choose from a group of colored mats. These, by the way, the triangle means where something is facing. and I'll ask them to choose something. And by the way, how somebody even chooses a mat when you hand them or hold for them a whole group of mats is super fascinating. Like you could ask them, the information starts happening immediately. You can ask them to choose one for you and your mother. And they choose their mother first. Or they'll sit there and they'll go, oh wow, I can't find myself. I don't know which color, I don't know. Already you have information that, okay, mom is, don't know yet, but mom is, well, usually I do know from the notes that there's already an issue there. But usually what ends up happening is that clearly the mother holds too big a space in this person's life. And I'm already aware, just how they're going about doing this initial task is already starting to inform me. Sometimes I'll point that out and sometimes I won't, but I'm always watching what's going on in their body, what's going on in their system as they're choosing just a goofy piece of colored mat that represents them. And because we're abstract thinkers, these are both metaphors, but they also end up being these bizarre kind of vortexes to whatever it is we assign to them. And people, it's very rare actually that people are like, I'm not doing that. I mean, of course, as I'm in talking to them and getting to know them, I'm getting a buy-in from them that they're going to go on this journey with me. But people, it's amazing how quickly people are willing to participate, and very logical people. I mean, I have to say most of the people who come in here are men. And I'm just so pleased with how natural this seems to be for most men, because it's so much about spatial relationships. And a lot of people go, oh, that's logical, which I find like, wow, it's super interesting. So I'm going to show you why somebody would say, for example, that it's logical. So I asked them to choose one for their mother, choose one for themselves, and choose one for their father. So this is what they did. This was the client, this was the father, and this was the mother. So if anybody feels like it, I encourage you to get on one of those mats you feel drawn to. And by the way, these silly little pieces of color have an amazing ability to bring up a lot of feeling. This is going to be a quick moment, but just know that when people have time to just be on these, a lot of information starts coming through, which is another aspect of constellation work, which if we had more time I would go into. But because it's such a deep somatic language, a phenomenal amount of information can start coming through. When you're representing, we call it representing, somebody you've never met, never will, and may be dead. Just by standing on a mat, just by feeling your body, the brilliance of the body starts coming through, and we affirm over and over again that we are so much more connected and our bodies are so much more genius than millennia of scientific irreverence to what this is, what we are. So, once again, does anybody want to take a gander and step on one of those things?
Sure. Go step on it?
Yeah. And for this, by the way, I don't really go into, so what are you getting? What information is coming up? But just notice how it would feel. This is the mother. This is the father. And notice that nobody wants to stand here because it's too intimate.
Too tight.
So I would have to stand this close to my mother. But this is what the client set up, is his experience of his internal relationship. So interestingly, what came out was his mother had died. By the way, he had placed his children here. Could not see his children because he was right here. And I'm not even going to look at him because again, it's a lover's proximity.
Could he have placed them further apart, or did he?
He put them there.
He put them this close
He could have
together.
put them anywhere in the
Okay,
room.
gotcha.
I gave him no instruction.
Okay.
All I said was, place them where you feel
Mhm.
is a true sense or true feeling for what your relationship is with them. That's all I tell people. And that's where he placed them. Super interesting, right? So what we ended up doing was, besides the fact that he's also in between his mother and his father. I mean, there's this happened.
And contrasexual.
And contrasexual?
Man on mother, woman on father.
That's true, and that might be a very, in this case, that I didn't notice that, but in this case, I didn't. But that's absolutely true. That it can be a different thing. People can reverse things in all kinds of interesting ways, and within a minute, you get a whole lot of information. That's a really interesting starting off point. So thank you. So what we ended up doing from there was, as long as, and by the way, if one parent is smack behind someone, it's usually this parent necessarily has to be overbearing. Or has to be, because it's too much responsibility. There's a reason why people are begotten by two people. When there's one, it suddenly becomes, usually shows up as a very glomming experience for this person, particularly when it's quite that close. So what we ended up doing, it was much more complicated, but what we ended up doing was getting to a point where he was able to express to her that he needed her, which brought up, he started sobbing. He needed her, and then once he was feeling the grief of that, he realized how angry he was at her for having left. And then the sentence that came, this is another aspect of constellation work, is we really listen for what we call healing sentences that are just exactly what the soul, the primary meaning, the primary emotion, the primary sense that the soul or the soma, the body, knows is true and has been holding on to, and it has a very liberating effect when you kind of ping right on what that is. What I suggested he say to his mother is, "You broke my heart, so I break hearts." And this was a man who was having multiple affairs, though he was married. He wasn't just going to prostitutes, he was getting people emotionally involved and then leaving them and unavailable. So this had a deep effect on him, and he started, he really cried, and we worked on, getting this so that he could experience this configuration. And then his children were available, and he was able to start moving forward. But again, just by, look how different that feels, completely different. Any questions about that?
When you said to select one of the colors and you had them all together,
Yeah.
I was anticipating, for me, I would have chosen red, and I don't
Yep.
see that color. So is there
I've got a
anything about
bunch.
that?
Oh, totally. I basically show them a whole stack. It's like, okay, what do you want? And I have all colors. And by the way, this might be a good moment to mention this. If you do decide you want to try this out, there are cultural issues with color that are quite interesting and challenging, because it's always important. We have different associations with color, and we have big differences between white and black mats, and particularly in our culture. So that's a whole other conversation. But it is really interesting to see when often people choose red, for example, for violent people in their lives, for their acting out behaviors. It's pretty common to choose red. It's also common to choose black, which can be a really difficult issue when there are African Americans in the room. So that's another thing that is important to navigate when you're working with colored mats. But again, that's a whole involved topic. So I also wanted to show you, for example, you can see something like this. This is just a really quick one. Somebody put that, yeah. and that was the client and their mother. They were different colors, but somebody does that, it takes them 5 seconds to do that. And that's a lot of information right there. And sure enough, there was major entanglement, there was emotional incesting, there was, I mean, that was like, whoa, that is a starting off place because it's so visual and it's so somatic. And everybody, I assume, I mean, I heard people go, ugh. Like, we know what that it feels just by looking at it, right? Anybody want to comment on what that feels like to look at that?
Suffocation.
I actually felt more, a bit more suffocated from the prior one. I mean, this one, it seems kind of, I don't feel as smothered by it. I feel kind of some aversion, but the other one seemed worse.
I had the exact opposite experience. I would have much preferred, I mean, I kind of identified with that other configuration, but this seems like would be preferable to me than the other.
And that's another really interesting thing too, as a facilitator, as a therapist. You know, it's a really good way to watch our own histories and preferences and projections, also in a visual way. Because the first one, for example, I don't want to put you on the spot and it may not be relevant to you. The first one, for example, was more of the loss of support and nurturing. This one, there was a sexual component, or there was a potentially sexual component. The whole thing was very charged. So, and there's other configurations that would show another, you know, different kinds of entanglements, different subtleties, different different implications. But again, when it's visual, you find out, well, what's that like for you? And then usually they'll go, yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. And that's part of why this is healing too, is as soon as it's outside, they can actually have a bit more of a meta experience. And there's also more of a relief. It gives them more of a space to actually, it's almost paradoxical. Once it's out of them, they can feel into themselves. They can start to have more space to go, oh, ew, that feels really icky. I don't like how that feels. And
So I'm wondering, how do you address that if it tends to show up in the work?
address what exactly?
The fact that the client may attempt, or consciously or not, to withhold some of what...
Again, that's the beauty. They don't know what they're doing.
I see.
As soon as they put it down, then they go, oh my God. But before they do it, they don't know. They don't know that they just put, their mother on top of something or underneath something, or they chose a color that's the same color that they chose for the weirdo uncle who probably molested them. They don't, that's the beauty of it. The body knows. The body does it. So it's a way to circumvent a lot of, it's like, and these are guys who usually guys, sometimes women too, who think they're really like, they want to outsmart the system. They're like trying to like kind of, that's not entirely true. That's not mostly true. Most of the people come here are so willing and they want to see it. They really want to get in their shadows. They're here. They're in pain. Their people around them are in pain, and they want to see it. But like I said, in either case, it's a way to get people out of their heads, into their bodies, and usually a lot more emotion will come through. So, anybody else want to?
Doesn't it also relate to how the therapist is working with the client? Some of these things also, and how the client might feel about the therapist in the relationship besides the parents.
Yes, and you can, I assume most of you are working with people, so obviously some rapports are easier than others. people, we have easier, just more affinity with some clients than others. So that's part of it too, is how do you, but I also find that by having these physical objects, it's a way to also negotiate some of that area, and you can always stop. And one of my mentors will actually have someone, if there's a difficulty, have someone choose a mat for themselves, and choose a mat for the therapist, which is a really easy way to use this, by the way, is to, okay, I'm really having trouble with this person. They don't trust me. What's really going on here? And you can come in and they could go, okay, I'm here and you're here. Well, that's that's going to be tough. So you gotta, what do you do with that in order that there can be, ideally, actually, is it better to feel this way? Is it better, hey, we're in this together going forward, or does this feel better? But that's part of the process. And again, by having a third point, rather than it just being in this locked-in dynamic, a lot can get worked out externally that then will immediately translate to the dynamic. You want to see another one?
I have a quick question. I'm curious if there is an ideal configuration.
It's a
for,
great
the
question.
nuclear family type.
Yes. According to Bert Hellinger and our own somatic experience of a lot of it, I don't want to keep using the same colors. Those are kind of... Oh well. I'm just going to use whatever. And you can feel that for yourself, that if ideally that is considered to be a healthy setup between parents. Yeah.
Siblings, parents.
So that there's support behind you. They're balanced, and this is a whole other topic. It's pretty much considered, it's not always the case, and particularly not the case in same-sex marriages, but when there's a male and female, usually the man on the right is going to be a more harmonious configuration. That's a whole other topic.
It feels, I wanted to do this before, it feels to me like the two that are a couple should turn a bit towards each other, because it looks like kind of an over-parenting scenario, like all their focus is on that one in front of them.
Could be. Yeah, I like it. I would rather be that way, I think. But it's also, let's see.
But then it's entirely.
But it's from the perspective of this, not from the couple.
Right.
That's true too.
Right. I guess the narcissistic child feeling, I don't mean that in a bad way, but I'm getting my needs met.
I appreciate that though, but that's an interesting thing to examine, though it gets really tricky when you have then people behind here and people behind here, and they start going out this way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an interesting question. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Will you be talking later about what kind of training is required to use these?
Sure.
Because what strikes me is it's so powerful and so immediate, and yet the then what is what's, I'm wondering, how do you get to the then what? How do you
Okay,
process it?
so training, constellation work is a deep philosophy and a complex technique. There's no doubt about it. And it's a wonderful training, which if anybody's interested in training, I can tell you who's training where and how, there's different ways to learn, and I highly recommend it. That said, there are, like even what I just showed you, if you had a few mats, and by the way, there's a lot of books too, and just had a sense of only doing that first look of put a mat down for you, put a mat down for your mom, put a mat down for your dad, and put a mat down for, it gets more complicated when it's an addiction, but that just is the first layer that you can begin to see a lot of information. That's why I wanted to show you a couple that were, as soon as they put those down, you all got a sense of what that might mean, particularly with clinical backgrounds. You have a lot of information. I mean, you can see things that are like, whoa, that looks really, out of whack, or this. Sometimes I've seen things that look a little psychotic even. There's a lot of information. So apart from training and apart from coming to a workshop that I'm going to eventually do for therapists, to really get more information about how to actually apply this work, I think it's a matter of, you can experiment is what I would say. Because I wasn't taught this specifically. When I started working here, it's what I decided to just develop, because I wasn't sure that working with people as placeholders was going to work with people who are already in a very stressed and potentially brain-addled or chemically off balance from what they'd been through, more so when working with drug and alcohol, which is another topic, really interesting, because it takes a lot of being in a lot of embodiment that actually that's not entirely true. I've worked with people who they've never done constellation work before. They come in and they're just amazing representatives, and they just move around in space and a lot of information comes through, but they're not in a 2-week intensive where their whole life is totally turned upside down. So I wanted to use something that other people could participate in, because just asking these guys, I mean, we have more time. Just asking these guys to step on a mat and feel, without getting any detail, they're able to already get a deep sense of what they've been carrying, what they've been living with. And I haven't even showed you like what happens when an addiction, they place one for an addiction. That's really, really interesting. I'm going to show you one. Did I answer your question, Patty?
Yes, sort of. Enough, thank you.
Yeah. Can talk about that more. Okay, so here's a really interesting one. He put his wife here, and and by the way, his parents, one was here, and one, I'm gonna have to place those because they're important. One was over here, and one was over here. And he kept insisting they were really close. He kept insisting they were close. I was like, well, that's interesting. And what's interesting too is they were so busy in their lives doing whatever they were doing, because I was like, well, where were they when this was going on? This was the molesting babysitter. And interestingly, this placement, first of all, no one was looking forward. This was going forward. No one was looking forward. And this was in a parental position. So it was like, these guys weren't around. Molesting babysitter was able to kind of be in this position. This was also a molesting presence. And his wife was smack in front of him. And guess where he put addiction? Let me just double check, but which direction it was facing. Yeah. Addiction was facing forward. And it was the only place for him to go. The only way to go forward he felt completely confined by this situation. When his wife wasn't there, he was looking at the brother he had molested. So we did a piece around that, because he felt a lot of guilt about it. Then his wife had been blocking that whole dynamic.
Does he feel like he's molesting the wife?
No, I don't think he did. I think it was more a way of not having to look at her, because could you stand on these?
On the brother or the?
Either. So as long as she was here, he couldn't see the brother.
Got it. Got it.
So it was kind of, that happens, that shows up a lot, that people will bring in people that function in a way to distance themselves or block what's happening. but when I put him here, he's like, oh, I just want to go here. I mean, if you try it out, if anybody wants to stand on it, stand on the green. And if you have, anybody else want to stand on these guys? I don't want to be your mustard.
I don't want to be your wife.
Where are you going to go?
Absolutely. And I'm facing the world.
Yeah?
Seemingly.
Any questions about that one?
Alison, how much objective interpretation do you do, or do you encourage them to tell you what they're perceiving?
I do my best to encourage them. But in my experience, that is the biggest challenge, is where's that line between guiding their opening new understanding and imposing on them, or taking them too far too fast. But that's certainly the art, is where that line is. Yeah.
Do these change over time?
In what way?
If you were to ask for them to arrange the same.
Yeah. This, what I'm showing you guys, is like the first minutes. And then we spend the rest of the process moving things around. I'm going to give you a great example of that. This one's super interesting. Did you have anybody?
Question.
Yes.
You said you interpret the colors. The first thing that came to mind was Christmas.
Yeah. Might that be of value?
Yeah.
You could ask. I mean, it's possible that Christmas was a particularly eventful time when there was more molestation going on. I don't know. I mean, it didn't come to my mind, but those are kinds of cues. As a facilitator, your body's getting information and you're getting your own associations, because these, everything, our sense of relationship, our attachment issues, our traumas are all encoded into the body. So this is a great way to find it out. Okay, so this guy, I love this one. Okay, so here's this guy. So he placed himself there. He placed his mother, right here. And so, or was it a little closer? Yeah, no, that's about it. Could somebody stand on that? And stand on this one? And I just felt, both of you take 2 steps forward. So they both knew that they couldn't do that, and then they had to kind of jockey because they were going to smash into each other, which could seem like a small detail, but that meant a lot to him. He was like, yeah, I can't. It's like he couldn't move forward in his life without smashing into his mother. And then try this. If you take, say she stays where she is, take 2 steps forward. She even moved slightly to the left. Did you notice that? She veered off to the left. It was not a lot, but enough, because she didn't want to be anywhere near this one. And in fact, in the actual constellation, it was a little closer, so stand a little bit more like right there. How does that feel with this person here?
It's like someone's looking over your shoulder. It's like,
Uh-huh. So then he put, if you don't mind staying there another minute, he put his addiction right there. So stand on the addiction. And actually, yeah, it was about like that proximity. And how does it feel having her there now?
It's less awkward.
It's less awkward.
It's more comforting.
Yep, it's more comforting, exactly.
Yeah, the thought that came to my mind was like it's a compromise formation, the addiction. It's like it manages the tension and it creates a face to the world, but it's a
just a compromise. It is, but it puts her in a more comforting position. She would use the word comforting. Yeah. So suddenly, and this was, that's pretty much exactly how it was. So suddenly she doesn't feel as
Judged or
judging. She feels a little more supportive, right? A little more supportive. Maybe we're going in the same direction
I
together.
feel like more of an equal in this position.
Super interesting information right there. Oh, as long as I'm the one, acting out and doing all this kind of stuff, mom's easier to handle, to tolerate, to be near, because she's there anyway. So how can I position myself in life so that she doesn't feel like this, like someone's breathing on me and I can always see her and everything I do is right there. So then I asked him to put one for recovery, and interestingly he propped it up on the wall here. People do some really creative things. It's really fun what people will do.
Literally
So he put
birthday.
recovery here. And then I said, and choose one for your wife. And I think that was red, actually. So will somebody stand on recovery? Oh, it was, yeah, that's true, you can't, because it was up on the wall. But anyway, there's there. Okay, so somebody stand on his wife.
facing the way that it's facing. Yeah.
What do you see?
Just the back, I would think it's doesn't approve. Maybe it would be
The wife's in the way.
Standing in the way of recovery.
Standing in the way of recovery. And he saw that so fast and he was like, oh my God.
His unconscious just told you.
Cool.
Told him.
Told the room.
Told the room. It was like boom. And what was so great too is first he did it, then he saw it, then he felt it. And then, to answer your question about changing things around, okay, thanks you guys. Then I said to him, after we did a whole process, I was like, well, how do you want them? And he was like, you mean I can move them? Isn't that awesome? How's that for a recovery question? You mean it doesn't have to be this way? And so then he starts to move these. First he says, oh, she's definitely going back, which was interesting. But then he started like moving them around and he didn't know where they went. And he started to I could feel I was getting upset. And I just normalized for him, so you don't know where they go. You don't know what feels good, because he'd spent his whole life with it not feeling good. And I also pointed out, and isn't it interesting, it didn't even occur to you could move your mother. Another huge thing for him. And he even said, do you mean I can move my mother? It's like, yeah. Yeah, so, did you have another question?
Yes, has anyone ever been somatically motivated to kick the mat, stomp on it, tear it in half, anything like that?
Yes,
and
all
have
of the
it happen?
above. Put it outside, that's happened many times. Yes, somebody tore one, it was beautiful actually. It was a love mat. And their sense of love had been ripped, and so he wanted to rip it, and it went in two places, and by the end they had come together. It was really a beautiful constellation actually. But while they're standing on him, I also just really encourage people to feel what they're feeling, and this brings up another issue of titration and pendulation. I thought you were going to ask, does anybody ever like really freak out or just get overloaded and flood? And it's a beautiful way to actually pendulate with people, because you can literally, they're on it and they're like feeling a lot, and then you can, okay, stand on. And they immediately, okay, a little more, you can stand off, you know. Yeah. So I was going to show you one more near and dear to my heart. Choose two first parents. And this is where you place them. Oops, sorry. And he was sitting here.
Which was the mom and the dad?
That was the mother and that was the father. So notice, does anybody want to get on him or do you want to just see it? Actually, you know what? Without getting on it, notice how just you're sitting here looking at those. If you tune into them, you can feel it in your body. Like I started to jiggle. I just look at that and I go, ugh. It's very sad.
Yeah. The colors.
Cold.
Are mom and dad divorced?
Good question. I'll tell you in a sec. What else could you potentially think if you saw this?
I think he identifies more with the mom.
Yes, that wasn't the color. I don't remember. These were correct. I don't remember what I think he chose red for her actually.
Oh.
But yes, that would be a great perception to have if that had been the case. In fact, I think you were right. Even though he chose a different color, I think that was true in this
Your
case.
body knew it.
Yeah, maybe.
Neither are available, not available. If he's interested, they're not.
He seems very lonely.
He's so far away.
Farthest away.
Was there a sense of longing to connect?
So much so that he wasn't facing towards his own life. And this, by the way, we've only been looking at family of origin. We haven't even begun to look into previous generations. But you can see some really interesting things where people can be faced back, and they don't even know unconsciously, they're faced back 3 generations with some difficulty that had happened. So they're not even available to move forward in their lives. But anyway, what turned out in this case is that the mother had, in high school, had an affair, 3rd time, gotten pregnant, was forced to marry. He did not want to be married. Neither of them wanted to be married. Yes, they ended up being divorced, but with a huge amount of hatred because it changed both their lives so dramatically. So he had to deal with being profoundly unwanted. Profoundly unwanted. And the cause for their ruined lives. So it went on from there. It was very beautiful what ended up happening. But it's just another example of how much can be seen and felt using these things. So I just want to, yes.
I was going to say, is it always those shapes, or do they have circle versions, or?
What a great
stars,
question. There should be. I love it. I don't know. I mean, I think we'll have to experiment with that. Let me know what you discover. It might just be kind of awkward and overwhelming because there are a lot of people who are like, I'm not going to do it right. I don't know how to do this. I'm not going to do it right. So if you have more options, it could get more complicated. And so much happens already, even with this kind of a constant shape. But I think it's great. I mean, you can certainly do this on tabletops with figures, objects, animals, which is one of my favorite things, and you get all kinds of information. And then you're looking to more the symbology of the actual thing they choose, which is really rich. Yeah, so it's endless, really, what you do.
So cool.
Glad you like it. Yeah.
Oh, you had a question?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've done this over the years with chairs,
Yeah.
and then in a group setting, have people sit in those chairs. But it was interesting when I got up there, because I think with those, one, you do have the color option, but what was interesting experience was that chairs almost feel like less threatening when you have people sitting in chairs. Like if somebody was in that center thing when we all stood up there. But I could see like using those two, one, you can get, right, you can make it the emotional thing, you know, more intense by standing on them, or less intense by just observing them on the, you know, they're easier to kind of move around too. But,
I think too with chairs, as I say, sitting in a chair, it's grounding and settling, but that can alter the energy and the emotional experience, because there's naturally kind of a, you know.
it's a little safe, it feels safer in the chair.
But it's a little, it can be a little entrenched too, I would think, you know, like, and there's more distance you can't get. Though I have to say, another really wonderful thing with these chairs I love these chairs. If people are really nervous, sometimes I'll have people just roll around and go, oh, this feels really good. Ooh, I like being over there, and just start to have the experience of moving. So I would say if you're, well, it's not my business what you're doing, but, but I think putting rollers on chairs gives more of a sense that there's more of a sense that people can change what's happening. That there's movement possible, that we can and it's a good place to end actually, and I want to answer your question too, Patty, but there's a deep internal controversy in the world of constellation work about the field, the morphogenetic field out here that we're all a part of is what's changing and healing people. Just by moving things around in it, it changes reality, it changes what's happening. In my mentor Jane Peterson's view, and many others, it's by shifting our internal pictures, we shift reality. Because it's our internal pictures that dictate how we interact with ourselves and with everyone around us, and particularly in our families. So this sense that people can shift and move and reconfigure, and is just such a valuable thing to allow the body to inspire and engender these new constellations. I'm actually, there's just some good time for some questions and answers. Yeah.
What is your favorite book on this subject?
The one by Bert Hellinger would be Love's Hidden Symmetry. And one of my aforementioned mentors, Stefan Hausner, STEPHAN, Hausner, HAUSNER, wrote a magnificent book called Even If It Costs Me My Life, and that is specifically, he's an expert on illness, using constellation work to look at the transgenerational dynamics behind illness. Yes.
So, just in summation, could you differentiate when you would choose working with objects versus the mats, and which applies better with groups versus individuals?
Okay.
Because it seems like the objects wouldn't work with the group.
No. Which is why, so I did a constellation for Patty a couple weeks ago on a table, and we used a box of objects. To answer your question, when I do a one-on-one session or over Skype, we work with objects. I work with the objects. They work with the objects if I'm not present with them. However, I had one person in an IOP, and my feeling, just intuitive feeling is that he was going to make him too much in his head, and that it just felt like it would get too fussy or frustrating for him. And I just felt like this is a better way to get this guy in his body and feeling, and so in that case I went with mats. But you could certainly do either. There are people who just do it in meditation. In groups, if it's a small group and there aren't enough people, I use mats. Or in this context, as I explained earlier, I use mats. But if there's plenty of people to represent, oh my God, it's fantastic to actually have groups. And by the way, I have a group I'm doing next Thursday night, and actually within 5 minutes from here, if anybody wants to come and experience a full constellation in a group, I'd love to have you. Yeah.
Have you ever used this in the context of internal family systems work to look at the client's organization and or relationship with his own multiplicity?
You can use this in any context for any issue. It's used for absolutely everything. It's used for, as I said, illness. It's used for financial issues. It's used for just conflicts in the family, for depression, for organizational issues in businesses. There's people who go into businesses and really, really quickly are able to ascertain what's out of whack, what's not working, what's a better way to go.
So no contraindications?
It's a good question. It can be very powerful what comes up. So if people are not mentally stable or they don't have sufficient resourcing internally and externally in their lives, it can definitely be too much. So you do have to watch, what any given client can handle, can tolerate. And sometimes it's just a matter of calibrating as the facilitator, and sometimes it's definitely a matter of referring out.
Okay, because it's, I would imagine many are coming in over trauma, which is going to predispose
Then they
them.
have this amazing team to,
Yeah.
to take care of
Well,
them.
there's a lot of containment. In
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of containment.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Any other questions?
Well, Alison, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.